This is Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions, a podcast from WURD Radio. In this limited series, we share the powerful stories of people who spent years and sometimes decades behind bars for crimes they did not commit. We explore their fights to reclaim their freedom and realize justice from a system that punishes them unfairly. These interviews were first broadcast live on Evening WURDs with Dr. James Peterson and are now presented as a podcast so more listeners can hear directly from those impacted by wrongful convictions. Exonerated is presented in partnership with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. This podcast is brought to you by Marrone Law Firm, standing by your side when it matters most.
As we acknowledge the 8th annual Wrongful Conviction Day, a day designed to raise awareness of causes and remedies of wrongful convictions and to recognize the impacts on innocent people and their families, WURD Radio, the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, and Marrone Law Firm brings you Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions series finale. A culminating special tonight here featuring legal and community leaders who will examine wrongful convictions from their perspective, discussing what justice means after freedom and how the fight continues. Later this hour, attorneys Keir Bradford Gray and Michael Cord will join the conversation. But first, let me introduce our first panel. Up first here is Miss LaTrista Webb, founder of the Elevation Project. Hi, LaTrista. And someone who is dedicated to working with elected officials, their policies and legislation, and nonprofit and social work entities to help formerly incarcerated individuals thrive in society. Also joining us by phone, we have attorney Jarrett Adams, civil rights attorney, author of Redeeming Justice, and an exonerated individual who co-founded Life After Justice, a nonprofit organization that helps exonerees reclaim their lives. Last but certainly not least, we have Zane Memeger, executive director of our Exonerated series partner, the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, whose mission is to exonerate those convicted of crimes they did not commit, to prevent innocent people from being prosecuted and convicted, and to help those wrongfully convicted transition back to freedom. I'm happy to welcome all of you all to this panel on Evening WURDs on Wrongful Conviction Day and for the series finale of Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions. LaTrista Webb, attorney Jarrett Adams, and Zane Memeger, all of you, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you for being here. Zane, I want to start with you. I just sort of a little logistics here. Talk a little bit about how Exonerated came about, this series, from your perspective as the executive director of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project.
Yeah. So I've been the executive director for the Pennsylvania Innocence Project for the last 3 months. Prior to that, I was in private practice, and I've spent my career with the U.S. Department of Justice as well as U.S. Attorney in Philadelphia between 2010 and 2016, and an assistant U.S. Attorney for 11 years doing organized crime cases. But I decided to make a career pivot because I thought I could really make a difference with regard to our criminal justice system and observations that I've seen that affect persons of color and how our criminal justice system operates. And while there needs to be accountability, no one's perfect. And the reality is that law enforcement can get cases wrong. And in the worst case scenario, innocent people can end up in prison for crimes that they did not commit. And those penalties are very significant. We received reach out from WURD about partnering up with regard to an effort to get the word out about wrongful convictions and what happens and what leads to wrongful convictions. And we have represented a number of individuals over the year. We were founded in 2009. We have exonerated 37 persons to date for crimes that they did not commit. And so we were an avenue to provide people who have gone through the experience to talk to your audience about what led to their situations and what their experiences have been since coming out of prison. So it's been a great partnership to be engaged with. And I think your audience has heard from a wide range of perspectives in terms of our clients.
It's stunning to think of 36 lives stolen in certain ways in this way. And yes, the stories have been incredible. The audience response to these stories also been incredible. Attorney Memeger, one quick follow up here, which I think is important for this audience. Talk to us about some of the key criteria or just the process involved with selecting cases from the perspective of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. I mean, it's, when we're talking to some of the exonerees on our airwaves, they're talking about the day when the Pennsylvania Innocence Project took on their case and what that meant to them in that moment. What's I'm sure it's very complicated, but as much as you can, give us a sense of how you all, what's the criteria? How do you all determine? Because it's an extraordinary effort on the part of your organization. Each case you take on, how do you choose the cases that you're going to take?
Yeah, so we have a really significant screening process. We get hundreds of letters every year. And since our founding, we've received over 8,000 letters. And we really try to identify those cases where we believe that the person is actually innocent of the crime that they were accused of and convicted of. And so the letters will come in and they'll get screened, and we'll make a determination as to whether or not it involves a case in Pennsylvania. We only handle state cases in Pennsylvania, but I think it's important for your audience to know that in every state there is an innocence project that exists to try and pursue cases on behalf of wrongfully convicted persons. But our focus here is on Pennsylvania, and we focus on cases that have already gone through the appeal process. So someone's had their trial, they've appealed it to the various courts in Pennsylvania. The courts have basically said your conviction stands, and now they're turning to us for assistance. If they get through that first level, then what we do is we end up sending the individual questionnaire, asking them a whole series of questions about their case and asking for information, which they'll send back. And it's really a back and forth process that we go through. And hopefully we get sufficient information that'll help us determine whether or not it should go to the next stage, which is then pulling the case file, looking at the evidence, talking to attorneys, trying to figure out what happened here and whether or not there is a credible claim of actual innocence there. And if so, then we'll move it to what we call a stage 4 process, where we do the investigation, and then we move forward with filing a post-conviction relief petition in court to pursue the case. And then after we start that process, that can also be a lengthy process. And when I say lengthy, we're talking 5 to 10 years sometimes.
Someone reported 9 years from the time at which they were contacted by you until they were actually exonerated. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. One more, Attorney Memeger. About how many, if you can share with us, about how many stage 4 cases are you all managing right now?
Yeah. So right now, in terms of stage 4 cases, we have 71 cases that are in stage 4. So that's investigation, litigation.
Wow.
They're at different points.
You have twice as many stage 4 cases as you've already as exonerees at this point. That's a tremendous yield and an important point. That's a lot of work, obviously, for you and your team. But it means that there are likely many more wrongfully convicted people in the state of Pennsylvania. I want to shift gears a little bit to LaTrista Webb. LaTrista, you know that I know what the Elevation Project is and what it's all about. But for our listening audiences and for our colleagues on the panel, talk to us about the mission of the Elevation Project.
Sure. Thanks first for having me here. When I looked at the flyer and the emails, I said, how did I get in with this panel?
Because you're doing the work, LaTrista, because you're doing the work, because you're doing the work.
And she said, yes, I'm sure. So thank you for having me. But I'm LaTrista Webb, founder and executive director of the Elevation Project. We are a reentry program in Philadelphia. We're based in West Philadelphia, and we work with formerly incarcerated men to start and maintain their own business. That is the core of the work that we do some work around civic engagement, getting people involved in voting. We're working on some legislation right now. And then we just offer traditional reentry support. But that is the short version of all the work we're doing over here.
Can you share with us the legislation you're working on? Because I do have questions about what kinds of legislation, and this is really for the whole panel, what kinds of legislation needs to be in place to stem the wave of wrongful convictions and to make our criminal justice system actually more just. Can you share with us what legislation you and your team are working on?
Sure. So we are a part of the Coalition for Parole Justice, and it is a coalition that's working around parole reform in Pennsylvania, specifically around long-term and lifetime parole, because we know that all of the juvenile lifers who were resentenced were all resentenced to life on parole. And so we are working around legislation around that. And then long-term parole, so people who have been on parole for over 5-10 years. There are people that I'm working with that have been on parole since the 80s, and they are still on parole.
Wait. They've been on parole for 40 plus years? What? I don't understand that. I'm sorry. Excuse my ignorance, LaTrista.
Okay, I'm sorry. Wait, their cases are from the 80s. They've been on parole. This person has been on a parole since 2002. Okay. So the year I graduated from high school, 2002, he's been on parole since then. So still over 20 years. Yeah. I always use him as the example because I graduated high school. I went to college. I went to grad school. I started an organization, had a child, and all of that time, he's still on parole. And he's never had any infractions, anything like that. And there is no way off of parole for him. The only way off of parole would be, I guess, if he went back to court and fought his case, or if he, there's no way off, or if he received a pardon. Yeah.
So that's I don't know. That's just stunning. I didn't understand that parole could be eternal. I just did not know that at all. And again, from your perspective, this is one of the things. Obviously, you all are working on legislation, but this is one of the many things that we can do to reform this system.
Yeah, because if you're talking about people, there are many, just sticking with like the theme of exoneration, right? There are many juvenile lifers or people who were sentenced as juveniles who didn't get to go through that whole process, right? The Innocence Project didn't write them back. And so they were offered the chance to come home on parole. And so for many of them, they admitted, when you go before the parole board, you have to admit guilt. And so they did that so that they could be paroled and they could come home. But in Pennsylvania, just speaking of like parole, you also have people who maybe, there are people on our team who were just maybe in the car or they were at the scene. And so they were charged with second-degree murder and still received a life sentence. So they were let out as juveniles because they were juveniles at the time. So they were resentenced and now they are on lifetime parole. And a lot of the people, my colleagues, people that I work with every day, are on long-term parole. So they work not only on legislation, but they work on campaigns. They do all of this great work, but then they still have to report to a parole agent.
If you are believe that you are innocent, that is a terrible choice to have to make. I mean, Tyree Wallace just told us his story, right? But that is a terrible choice to have to make between either you can get out because the laws have changed or people have worked to get you out, but you have to admit to something maybe you didn't do in order to get out. It doesn't even make sense. As I'm saying, but thank you for pointing that out for us, LaTrista. Attorney Jarrett Adams, I want to turn to you for a moment here. Can you talk to us a little bit? I mean, your experiences are unique because you have been incarcerated. You have turned your life around. You're an attorney now. You're doing the work to help other folks get exonerated. From your perspective, what are some of the systemic issues within the justice system that you believe contribute to wrongful convictions?
Well, thank you for having me, and I want to send a tip of the cap to my panelists as well. Great question. It is layered with answers, but I'll tell you this: when when you have more resources designed for prosecution, arrest, and adjudication, and you give a small percentage of that to public defense and to, investigators and different resources, and as far as the public defender's offices and impoverished people have access to, you're going to get a lopsided result. And I think that we should address that. I think that when you talk about the caseloads that the Innocence Project are dealing with, it's a derivative of the folks who a higher percentage of the folks who are reaching out to the Innocence Project for help. Those folks more than likely went through a public defender system, whether it be a panelist attorney or whether it be some court-appointed system. And so it's overwhelming for the Innocence Project. So you can just imagine what it's like when it comes to our court-appointed system. So that's one of the things that we can do if we want to address it. The DOJ shows a pie chart of how much funding goes towards corrections and then reintegration. And you don't see an equal justice system for the folks who rely heavily on public defense. And that is the majority of Americans who come encounter with the criminal system. Most people aren't able to afford a top-notch attorney. And I also think this. I just think that we have an adversarial system by nature. I shared this story before. I think on your show, and I'll share it again. When I was going through law school, I had the opportunity to do a study abroad over in England. And part of the process over there is that attorneys are both defense attorneys one day, they could be prosecuting a case the next day. I use this as an example because what that does, in my opinion, is it allows for people never to not have sympathy and empathy for the people who come through our justice system. And I think that the way we have it set up is that you have the prosecutor's office and you have the defense side of things. And if folks are just trying to win, justice oftentimes becomes the loser.
Attorney Adams, I would like for you to share your story for our audience. I know you've talked about it here before, but just so folks kind of know how you come to this table and how you come to these issues that we're talking about for the series finale here of Exonerated.
I'm a 17-year-old, south side of Chicago, born and raised. I'm falsely accused of a sexual assault along with two of my friends. We didn't have attorneys. We faced a system that allowed us to be in front of an all-white jury. The police withheld statements and critical evidence that undermined the allegations, and I was ultimately wrongfully convicted and sentenced to serve 28 years in prison as a 17-year-old. I wrote an Innocence Project, similar to what Attorney Memeger was speaking of. I waited at least a year or two before the Wisconsin Innocence Project responded. They did, litigated my case all the way to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, where they unanimously reversed my conviction, and I was released. The record on my record of conviction was expunged, but the damage that it had done to me and my family was not. I got out, and I salute my mom and my aunts, the fearless Black women who I dedicated my book to, who encouraged me to not let this be a period in my life, but let it be a comma, and continue to go past this and grow past it. So I enrolled in school, graduated, with my associate's degree, my bachelor's degree, eventually my law degree, and I had the opportunity to clerk in the same 7th Circuit that overturned my conviction before I started to practice law. I mention all of these accomplishments not to impress, anyone, but just to impress upon everyone the importance of our justice system getting it right. I didn't go to prison and swallow a smart pill. I already had, some of these talents and attributes before, my life was almost taken away from me. And one other important thing that I must mention is that I don't think I would be here without the encouragement of my family in taking mental health care seriously when I got out. It helped in my reintegration, which is why I created the organization Life After Justice. And what we do is provide mental health care, amongst other things, to people who have been wrongfully convicted And we've created a program that specifically trains therapists on how to provide therapy for folks who go through this car crash that is a wrongful conviction.
Mm-hmm. We're definitely going to circle back to Life After Justice, Attorney Adams. I want to come back to you, Attorney Memeger, because I don't know if we've captured the scale of the incoming to the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. I mean, we have some sense of the scale of some of the cases as you guys you all are progressing to that stage 4 step. But how much incoming are you receiving on I don't know, is it daily? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? What is the incoming like? Who's the person who has to open up all the letters every day, Attorney Memeger?
Yeah, we have a intake person, Yvonne Carter, who's fantastic. And every day we get a number of letters. So far this year, we've gotten about 225 letters. Over the course of the organization's history, we've gotten over 8,000 letters asking for help. And just getting through that volume is an arduous task, and identifying those cases to move forward. It's staggering in terms of the numbers coming in. And I think having been in law enforcement, having been a prosecutor at the federal level, working with state prosecutors, state law enforcement, there are a lot of people in prison for crimes that they did not commit. And I've been was on the board before taking on the executive director's role. And some of the things that you see in terms of what leads to wrongful convictions leaves you just scratching your head, like, how could this actually happen? And you have a moral compass and you think you're doing the right thing as a prosecutor, and you think others in your situation would be doing the same thing. But that, unfortunately, is not always the case. And people end up paying the ultimate price, where they lose years and years of their life for something that they did not do.
I want to turn back to you, Miss LaTrista Webb. You are doing that work with folks who are out, and you see some of the carnage and what happens to families. You've also been personally impacted by this. What do you say to listeners or people in our community who maybe, they don't understand the scale or the scope of the problem? Maybe they want to help out. Talk to us about your journey with Elevation Project in terms of the people who you work with and getting people involved and engaged in these efforts. Like one of the things that is, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but one of the reasons why people are probably going to get sick of me talking about criminal justice issues on these airwaves is because I feel like I'm screaming out into a void, and there are too many people, even in our own community, even though our own community is disparately impacted by it, but we're disconnected from this issue and how big of an issue it is and what it's actually doing. Talk to us a little bit about your story, LaTrista, and maybe share some insights about because your team is involved. You know what I mean? Like, you have a team that's like really engaged. How do we identify those people, support those people, and make that energy of the Elevation Project like more contagious in our community?
Yeah, well, first for us, it starts where we're like inside out, right? So even though we are a reentry program, we have an advisory board that is made up of incarcerated people. So I was even sitting here smiling, thinking, like, if they knew that I was on a panel with the Innocence Project and I wasn't screaming out their names because they're probably one of those 8,000 letters you received, right? They'd be trying to like beat me up because it's just like, right. So it's inside out. And then also we connect with families. So when people come home, I'm not just connecting with, John, who has the problem. We're connecting with John and his family, right? So we get the whole picture. And I think when you have the whole picture and the whole story, it's hard not to want to be involved. And an example I think of, so people are like, oh, well, they were exonerated, but you'll hear like they might have did something, right? Or they probably did something, because why were they there? But there is a young man who was recently exonerated in Pennsylvania, came home to Philadelphia. He walked into the jail, and his mom his mom was also in a wheelchair. So he was wheeled out of the court, next to his mom, right? They both were willed out of the courtroom. And he was in jail for, I believe it was 17 years for a crime he did not commit. But then he they didn't even take care of his physical health.
Right.
And I think that's the part people miss, because it's like, you hear like the whispers, and the whispers say, oh, well, they get to come home, or, oh, well, they're millionaires now, but they
not in Pennsylvania, they're not.
Right? Being a millionaire is not guaranteed. It doesn't happen for everybody, but even still, how do we decide the value of years of someone's life? Or how do we decide the value of someone who walked into jail, a healthy young man, and is rolled out, still under 40, is rolled out in a wheelchair? And so those are the things that when people question this work, and they question, why you're having these panels, and why all of us are pushing this work forward, is that, one, there are innocent people, but bad things happen to people in prisons, not just across Pennsylvania, but across this country. And so no one should go to prison and not come out the same way they went in. And then it's the impact of the mental health that was talked about. And not many families are supporting people and getting that mental health support that they need, and all of the things that go into reentry. Reentry is not just like, let me help you find a job. Reentry is, let me help you become whole again, because you lost so many pieces of yourself. But what I heard today that stuck out to me, and I'm going to I'll admit it, is that I didn't swallow a smart pill. Some of the smartest, most creative people are inside of Pennsylvania prisons, and that's where we should get our energy from.
Attorney Adams, LaTrista is summoning you here on the panel. I do want to turn back to life after justice, Attorney Adams. Can you talk to us a little bit about, you said you were very grateful that your family encouraged you to seek mental health mental health treatment once you were exonerated. And, we have, over the course of the Exonerated series, in partnership with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, we have talked with men who spent 20, 30 years, and some of them have done long stretches of those years in solitary confinement. And they were very eloquent and honest about how they tried to manage their mental health through different things. Therapy wasn't always one of them, but they all had to come up with different ways to try to manage their mental constitution through suffering through something like solitary for years and years, and sometimes for long stretches at a time. I know you're thankful to your family for encouraging you to do it. How did you know ultimately that that was the path, that mental health was the work you needed to do on the other side of your own experience?
I mean, there's no, when you go through something as traumatic as our criminal system, there's no way you walk out of there without the tentacles of that conviction, wrongful or rightfully, still reaching you. And the thing about it was, I noticed things myself, short-tempered, short patience. I found myself trying to catch up with the 9, almost 10 years that was stolen from me, and it wasn't healthy. I wasn't taking breaks. Most of my friends, when I had got out, they weren't turning up anymore. They were turning down beds and putting their kids to sleep and focused on their careers. And so all of that was agonizing and excruciating to know that was taken from me. And so I needed to decompress. And I think that, my mom and my aunt's encouragement of it was also seeing those signs. And you speak about solitary confinement. Of the almost 10 years I spent in prison, I did about 3.5 years in solitary confinement.
Unbelievable.
And the strange thing about it, I never had an act of violence at all on my record. They put me in solitary confinement because they said that I was doing a group resistance and petitious behavior and riotous behavior by organizing the inmates in the prison to challenge the DOC handbook. So it had nothing to do with any violence, any attack or anything like that. They literally were putting me in segregation but continuing to litigate on behalf of the other inmates who were in the institution that I was in. So I think one of the things that must happen when we start to continue to have these conversations about the criminal justice system, we have to include more of the voices of the family, because that's 90% of who people are coming home to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're not coming home to a lot of resources. They're not coming home to even access to reintegration tools and mental health care. And so I think that hearing from those families about what is needed would help, because I believe, and I say this a lot, the people who are closest to the fire, they usually have the solutions to put it out. They just don't have the water to extinguish it.
Attorney Memeger, as you're hearing LaTrista and her talk about her work, and Attorney Adams will talk about his experiences, what, from your perspective, are the most or more pressing legislative or policy changes that we need to have in place in order to prevent wrongful convictions, but also to support the exonerated and the reentry individuals in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so in terms of preventing wrongful convictions, going up next week is House Bill 413, which involves audiovisual recording of interrogations. As you've probably heard, false confessions often lead to wrongful convictions. And this law, if it were to be enacted, would require that in violent crime cases, law enforcement would have to record the interrogation, which would hopefully reduce any misconduct that occurs. But then it would also contribute to more valid jury verdicts, because you'll actually be able to see the interrogation, whether or not it happened appropriately according to law, and hopefully would minimize bad behavior by police in that setting. So that's going up next week on the House floor. We'll see how that turns out. But if it gets through the House, then hopefully the Senate will address that bill, and hopefully we will eventually get a law that deals with audiovisual recordings of interrogations.
Can you give us the numerical identification? Is House Bill, what's the numerical identification?
House Bill 413.
413. Now, I'm going to be keen to see what legislator, what lawmaker is not going to back that. But sorry for interrupting you, Attorney Memeger. Go ahead.
Yeah, but in terms of the individuals coming home, in Pennsylvania, you literally walk out the prison and they wave bye to you. They don't give you there's no compensation. There are no services provided to you. Unlike if you have actually committed a crime and you served your time, there are provisions to start providing services to you through parole process, etc., and directing you to certain providers. But there's nothing like that here in Pennsylvania. The other component of what we do here at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project is we have a reentry program, and we serve the clients that we exonerated, the 35 plus clients. But we also assist clients in Pennsylvania who weren't our clients but were exonerated through the efforts of other lawyers and help provide reentry services. We work with some of the universities here in collaboration to help provide mental health treatment. We work with different organizations to do employment counseling, get training opportunities, deal with family-related issues, because that's significant. When individuals come home, they've been separated from their families for long periods of time. Their families have gone on with their lives to a certain degree, and now they're coming into this new environment. And how does that family dynamic and relationship work? And so working with the family and the client to help that go as smoothly as possible, hopefully connecting them with resources to help them navigate that. But it's a long process, and we keep up with our clients, and we have support groups. So for certain clients who want to have sessions to talk to our reentry coordinator and social service folks, they can do that to help them navigate those issues. Some clients over the course of time don't need our services anymore. Others at different points of time need our services more than others, depending on how things flow because they, despite the fact that they're exonerated, that they didn't commit the crime, there's often this perception that they must have done something and they're being held accountable for things that they shouldn't be by folks who are making decisions as to whether or not they should get a job opportunity or whether or not they should get an educational opportunity, a whole host of things. And so it's lifelong consequences.
I literally hate that part of this whole phenomenon that an exonerated person, even a person who has served their time and come out, that people will still try to hang something over their head, right? Because that's the feeling that dogs the mental constitution of the exonerated and folks who are just trying to get their lives back together after reentry. LaTrista Webb, I want to circle back to you. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that family separation piece. You mentioned that part of the work of the Elevation Project is to make sure you're engaging the families. What does that work look like? I mean, I can only imagine that family separation for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it's almost like bringing a stranger back into the family unit. How does the Elevation Project do that work? And I know you do a lot of that work yourself. What does that look like?
Yeah, so it looks very different for the Elevation Project than it probably looks for most programs. And also becomes difficult to fund for that reason. Because for me, I have this belief that if someone was incarcerated for a long period of time, the issue when it comes to reintegrating with your family is that you just missed a lot. Right. And so you have to give people opportunities they can't do the things that they missed, right? They can't get that time back, but just to do things together. And so for us, a lot of times it just looks like fun. Reentry is just the opportunity to have fun. So an example is just this Saturday that passed, we took 100 formerly incarcerated people. It was probably about 50, 60 of them were formerly incarcerated, and whoever they wanted to bring with them. And we just went to Dorney Park for the day. Wow. You had to be over 25 to go. You had to be with someone who had served some time. And for most of our guys, like the idea of just like getting on a roller coaster was like, no. And I just saw my guy, his girlfriend was just like dragging him through the park. And I was like, where are you guys going? And she was like, we're going to that roller coaster. And he's like, I have to go to the bathroom.
I love it.
So it's just those opportunities, right? To be fun, to have fun, not to be judged, and just be able to spend time with the people that you love. Because a lot of times we work a lot with men. So fathers want to come home and they want to be dads, right? So you want to insert yourself. And the kid is saying like, well, where you been? I don't have to listen to what you're talking about. Or the mom is saying, you know, the saying I don't like, but I've been mom and dad. Like, what are you talking about? And so if you just give a father the opportunity to spend time with their child, to do things with their children, and to work on building relationship that way, I think that helps a lot. And then in those times, so we'll have this summer had an event in the park, and I asked the therapist to come out, a male therapist, and I said, in the middle of the park, you're going to have a conversation with some men. And everybody was like, the middle of the park? But you would be surprised how many guys sat down in that circle. They wanted us to turn the music down. If the DJ turned it back up, they were telling me the DJ was disrespectful because they just wanted to be heard. But also you have to do it in a way that's not saying, you've been locked up for 20 years. You need to talk to somebody, because nobody wants to hear that. You want to still be taught. You want to be understood, but you want to be given the chance to, you know, try some things. And so that's what we try to do here, to incorporate fun in pretty much everything that's happening.
Thank you for that. Believe it or not, folks, we are very short on time. We got about four minutes left on the panel. I want to make sure we circle back to everybody. I want to start with you, Attorney Jarrett Adams. What message would you like to share with those who are currently fighting for their freedom or working towards exoneration? What would you say to the individuals who are in your situation from years ago?
And continue to treat each day like you're going home the next. And what I mean by that is that will continue to keep your hope, your faith, during these times, and it will preserve your mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
When people give up, it's not physical that you see first. It's the mental giving up that leads to the physical deterioration. So I pray folks will get closer to their faith and continue to walk those tears as if you're going to go home and next. And so when it does happen, you'll be prepared, because folks don't jump out planes without making sure that their parachute is ready to go. Thank you again for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you, Attorney Adams. Attorney Memeger, I have two quick questions for you. The first is, over the course of the Exonerated series, we got repeated and consistent requests for women to share their stories on the program. I'm curious as to what I've said to those callers and listeners, like, hey, we're going to try to work with our partners and figure that out. But are there fewer women that are coming across the purview of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project? And is that a structural issue? Is that have something to do with how and why women are convicted versus how and why men are convicted? But I'm just curious, how do we answer the question from the audience who've really been emotionally attached to Exonerated as to how do we get women to share their stories as well?
Yeah. From our work, very few women end up with us in terms of their cases, in terms of violent crime cases is generally what we're working with, and lengthy prison sentences, whether or not it's 30, 40 years or life in prison, which we're working with. And so that's just the reality of our work. And going back to my days as a prosecutor, the vast majority of defendants that we were prosecuting in the violent crime drug arena were mostly men.
Men kill more than women do. I mean, statistically,
right.
Much more. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so I think you're seeing that play itself out in terms of the work that happens with regard to exonerations. But there are cases that have occurred. We've handled some where a woman was wrongfully convicted and we were able to successfully get them exonerated.
Mm-hmm. Last question for you, Attorney Memeger. Talk to us a little about from the perspective of the leadership at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. What are the things that you want audiences to take away from this series? What are the things you want audiences to take away from, even from this finale? What do you want audiences to take away? You all have invested a lot of time and energy and brought to us great voices around these issues and this cause. But what do you want folks to take away from this effort?
Well, I think folks to understand that folks that are engaged with innocence work, particularly at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, are dedicated to this work. We have a lot of longtime employees that their sole focus and mission is to help the wrongfully convicted right the wrongs and hopefully get out of prison. I've got a staff of 12 people.
Wow. Small staff. Wow.
Is what we're working with in Pennsylvania across the entire state to achieve that goal. But we fight tooth and nail on behalf of individuals who we believe are actually innocent, and we really don't sleep much. But it takes a lot of work and effort to get to the finish line in these matters.
LaTrista Webb, you're going to have our last word here. Talk to us a little bit about your hopes for the future, for the Elevation Project, and just for this broader movement around reentry and criminal justice reform.
Yeah. So first, thank you for having me, and to hear that the Pennsylvania Innocence Project only has
that's mind blowing.
Like 7 more employees than me, and they're working.
That's mind blowing.
The state and doing so much. Just thank you for your work. I know sometimes it can feel like a thankless job, but on behalf of myself, the Elevation Project, and this community, thank you for all that you all do, especially to the lady opening all the letters. Shout out to her, because I did not expect you to say it was only one person. So shout out to her. But I think what I would want people to take away from this as this country is just the way it is, and people are always talking about public safety and everybody wants to be safe. And we hear that often, but we cannot be safe, and we cannot have public safety when the wrong people are going to prison. And if people didn't learn anything from this series or from this conversation today, it should just be that as a community, we need to care about what's happening in our courtrooms. We need to care about what's happening in our prisons, in our county jails, because we cannot have public safety if we do not consider what the criminal justice system is doing. And so to your listeners, I would say, if you have a day off from work, go sit in a courtroom. Sit on the side of the person that is being prosecuted, because an empty courtroom is an unjust courtroom. And these things happen because courtrooms don't have people in them. They only have lawyers. They only have DAs, detectives, and cops. And then on the other side, the courtroom is empty. So an empty courtroom is an unjust courtroom. And if you have a day off, go sit in someone's courtroom.
I love that. LaTrista's also reminded me that everyone needs to vote on November 4th because there are judges all up and down that ballot. Attorney Jarrett Adams, civil rights attorney, author of Redeeming Justice, and an exonerated individual who co-founded Life After Justice, a nonprofit organization that helps exonerees reclaim their lives. Attorney Zane Memeger, the executive director of our Exonerated series partner, the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, whose mission is to exonerate those convicted of crimes they did not commit, to prevent innocent people from being prosecuted and convicted, and to help the wrongfully convicted transition to freedom. And of course, Ms. LaTrista Webb, founder of the Elevation Project and someone who has dedicated her life to working with elected officials, their policies and legislation, and nonprofit and social work entities to help formerly incarcerated individuals thrive in society. LaTrista, Attorney Adams, Attorney Memeger, thank you all so much for joining us here for the first panel of the series finale of Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Conviction.
You're listening to Exonerated on WURD.
Insurance companies have lawyers, shouldn't you? At Marrone Law, they fight for people with serious injuries and they deliver big results. From car accidents and catastrophic injuries to medical malpractice and civil rights violations, they fight, they win. You deserve a team that gets results. They've recovered hundreds of millions for their clients and they're ready to fight for you. Marrone Law, get justice. Call 215-732-6700 today.
And now back to Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions on WURD.
Evening WURDs is back on WURD, 900 AM, 96.1 FM, wordradio.com, and the WURD radio app. As we continue our Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions series finale, I now want to welcome our next panelist, Attorney Keir Bradford Gray, head of civil rights litigation at Marrone Law Firm, where she provides in-depth legal perspectives to help resolve complex cases and applies her skills of strategic process and negotiation to champion her clients for fair and equitable outcomes. And of course, Attorney Michael Cord, WURD radio host of Radio Courtroom, activist and criminal defense attorney, where he works to break barriers that discriminate and disenfranchise citizens in the African American community. I'm so happy to welcome to Evening WURDs on Wrongful Conviction Day as we continue the series finale of Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions, attorneys Keir Bradford Gray and Michael Cord, who will also be participating in our Founders Day Defenders of Democracy panel tomorrow, moderated by yours truly. It's a sold-out event, folks. If you're unable to attend, you can listen to WURD Radio next week for the airing of that panel. Attorney Bradford Gray, Attorney Cord, welcome to Evening WURDs.
Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What a program we're having here so far. Attorney Bradford Gray, can you talk to our audience about, I know you were listening to little parts of the beginning of the show. Can you tell us how you felt listening to Tyree Wallace talk about his case and talk about your involvement in it?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to hear Tyree's voice on the outside because, as you know, he was in jail for about 27 years for a crime he didn't commit. Tyree is a remarkable person because despite being found guilty for a crime he didn't commit, he still continued to do a lot in jail, not only to give back, but to fight for his innocence. And I say that for this reason. You've got a person that was fighting for his innocence since the day he got convicted, never stopped. And despite having very good factual grounds for some of the issues that he brought up in his case that were just totally messed up, right? I mean, and that's the best way I can say it. Totally unjust. It was very clear this man was a product of police misconduct and prosecutorial misconduct. He was time barred in many of his issues, despite they were.
Let our audience know what that means, Attorney Bradford Gray.
Right, I know, and I'm like talking in my own talk, right? If he didn't do certain things or file appeals within a year about certain things, like his counsel was ineffective, or the judge just messed up the case, right? They didn't make the right objections or they didn't make the right rulings on objections. They excluded evidence, whatever that is, that was the trial just did not go well. If you don't have the wherewithal to file a legal motion saying you want to appeal on certain grounds that you may not even understand, you just know something didn't go right, then you waive that because you are barred, meaning you cannot bring those claims after a year. The only claims you can bring after a year are claims where you just newly discovered evidence that you had no access to during that time that you would have been required to file something, or that the prosecutor failed to turn over an important piece of evidence that could have changed the outcome of the case. That is a very rare find for people to find, something that's like a needle in the haystack. I have to give kudos to Larry Krasner for doing a open file policy where attorneys can go and look at a homicide file that has every document that detectives acquire during the course of the investigation. And some of those documents they don't turn over to the prosecutor. It's just documents that they acquired through all of their investigation where you're able to see where their leads were, where they weren't. That's where you're starting to find how police were cutting corners, doing things that were just a total affront to anyone's constitutional rights, and basically out cheating. They were just cheating. And honestly, it's cost us billions. And I'm not just talking about in dollars. It's cost us in credibility in our justice system. It's cost us in this facade of public safety, because if you put the wrong person behind jail, the real person's still out there. So I am doubly taxed by your ineptness, by your misconduct, and by your unchecked accountability.
Attorney Michael Cord, you heard Attorney Adams talk about the lopsidedness with which public defense is funded versus the public investment in prosecution. I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit as a criminal defense attorney. I mean, obviously you're not a public defender, but can you speak to that lopsidedness, that pie chart that Attorney Adams was referring to in terms of the criminal justice system?
It's always a David versus Goliath fight in the courtroom, and it starts with the funding. And I can't just blame the prosecutors, because that's what the American public wants. They want to give more money to cops. They want to give more money to prosecutors. They all seem to feel that anybody who is charged with a crime is therefore guilty. And because they're guilty, the lopsidedness of the funding is okay. So the public needs to change its attitude. No disrespect to folks here in Philly, certainly not the mayor, but even when you talk about the city budget, you look at how much the prosecutors get and how much the defense attorneys get. And if it were going to be approached logically, it'd be flipped around. Because you want to, here's the thing, when you talk about going to court, and this is why prosecutors have so much power. In fact, I always say the prosecutors have more power than the mayor, than the governor, than the president. Why do I say that? Because prosecutors can do four things that the mayor, the governor, and the president can't do. They can take away your property by having a fine imposed. They can take away your liberty by throwing you in jail. They can take away your children through a custody order, and they can take away your life through the death penalty. It seems that if you're going into the ring and fight, that person who has all that power would seem to get less in order to level the playing field, but that's not the case. So clearly, it's a problem in regard to funding. Keir will tell you the whole notion of a presumption of innocence is a joke. When we walk into a courtroom, if you got a young black male, you know the presumption is that the white cop is telling the truth and the black defendant is lying. Therefore, the defendant has to prove his innocence. And very quickly, let me say this because I got the microphone and I never met a microphone I didn't love. So give me 30 more seconds and I'll say this. This is really important. And first of all, I think I know I speak on behalf of Keir when I say to you, Dr. Peterson, you're doing an excellent job in this whole thing. I mean, put the information out and you see over my right shoulder, there's a picture of Malcolm. And Malcolm always talks about make it plain. You got these Ivy League PhDs in your resume and you still make it plain. So I want to give you a shout out for that. And Keir with that highfalutin law firm, you know how that works. That's why you had to break it down in terms of time bar. So make a long story short, let me just say this. When we talk about the whole notion of presumption of innocence, here's what it comes down to. And that's why your discussion about the whole issue of exoneration is so important. When I go to court, and I'm not going to name names of all the defendants I've represented in the last 30 years or so, but it comes down to this. Not guilty does not mean factually innocent.
That's right.
When a judge says to a jury, hey, it's time to deliberate, go back there and decide whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty. The judge doesn't say decide whether the defendant is guilty or innocent. It's not about being innocent. It's all about whether the prosecution has proven its case. So again, very quickly in the O.J. Simpson case, I say, and I know black people are going to hate me for this, I say that guy did it. But if I was on the jury and we were in there to deliberate and we went around the table in deliberation and they said, how many people think that O.J. did it? I'd have raised my hand. How many people say that O.J. is not guilty? I'd have raised my hand. I said, well, how can you have done the crime but not guilty? Well, there's the DNA that was discombobulated. There's the lying cop.
Police misconduct.
That's exactly what it's about. So it's not about whether OJ did it, it's whether it's fair. And I know this is the third time I'm going to say this is my last point, but I swear it's
Bro, we have time. We have time. Go ahead.
Excellent. I always tell people who ask me, how can I represent people who I know did the crime? And I got my lawyerly answer, well, how can I know it? I wasn't there. But what if I did know it? What if there's a video? If a cop, my next door neighbor doesn't like me and I got these fancy cars and I got these fancy jewelry and I got all this stuff. And one day when I leave my house, the cop, my neighbor, breaks into my garage, comes into my house, finds all this stolen jewelry, all these fake auto titles from me stealing cars. And now that cop takes it to the DA and I get charged. I can't be found guilty, even though I'm clearly a jewelry thief. I'm clearly a car thief. Why? Because remember those 4 awesome powers I said at the beginning. Take away your life, your liberty, your children, all your property, all that stuff. So it has to be a level playing field. And that gets me to exoneration. When Keir talks about exoneration, she's not talking about people who did a crime and got off on the quote unquote technicality. She's talking about people who didn't do it. Can you imagine 27 days, let alone years, 27 days, minutes, seconds in jail for a crime you didn't commit? I'm already sitting down. I'll finally shut up.
You're listening to the series finale of Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions, live here on Evening WURDs on WRD 900 AM, 96.1 FM, Philadelphia, wordradio.com, and the Word Radio app. That was the voice of attorney Michael Court. I want to turn to you, attorney Keir Bradford Gray. You know, I know that for me, these issues feel like to me like the civil rights issue of my lifetime. That's what it feels like to me. Can you give our audience a sense of how Exonerated and exonerees and some of the work that you do is a civil rights issue on the order of like voting rights or on the order of anything that we look back historically? I know that I've written about this, and maybe I do still spend too much time talking about it, but help our audience understand how you see this work situated within the broader civil rights movement.
So, first of all, it starts with the conversations. Look, we hadn't done things that really had or made these issues household conversations until recently. I guess the past decade. Started with Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow.
Yep.
Then Ava DuVernay started creating documentary films and as well as just films.
13th and When They See Us. 13th and When They See Us. Incredible.
I mean, When They See Us is just the most powerful story that one could tell about how innocent people, young Black boys, can get their lives destroyed just for someone to climb up the ladder. And that is the civil rights issue right there, that people can have someone's life in their hands. And because, like Mike said, there's automatic credibility on this side, lack of checks and balances or any kind of transparency in some of the things that they do, it lends itself to people using the system to build their resume so they can have a quality life at the expense of disposable people who have no connection to social value. And when I say that, I mean, who's going to care about someone in North Philly who's got no access to a councilman, who's got no access to the mayor or anyone important, that if they said that I did something wrong, no one's going to hear them. So it is so important that you amplify these voices, because again, this is not just an issue for the people who are wrongfully convicted. It's an issue for all of us. One, we're paying for this. Two, I live in this community. I do not want a facade of public safety. You know that saying, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining.
Yes.
Right? That's exactly what's happening, because my community is being doubly taxed by this. My community is the one that's suffering from the financial burden of funding things like this, such as starting from the arrest, the conviction, the exoneration, maybe the civil lawsuit. But I will get back to this right here. The civil rights issue, this has not been just of this time. This has always been. We started with To Kill a Mockingbird, right? It's just now that people are starting to care and pay attention, because people like yourself, scholarly people, people who are just downright boots on the ground, community people, are being able to articulate it in ways that it's relatable. And people are saying, wait, that really happened, and that person wasn't just a bad seed?
Right.
Because, it was to live by the sword, die by the sword most of the time. But now you're seeing people who are upstanding members, who had jobs, working class people, who had a future, a life, and it was just taken away. And one of the things I do want to say, what's going to be a civil rights issue that we still have to advance, if you take someone's life away, you got to pay. You got to.
Yeah. I'm going to, Attorney Court, I want you to pick up right there. So first, I think, and this is going to sound strange, but a lot of the listeners to Exonerated, they assumed that the people that we had on our program would be able to, that there would be protocols and procedures for them to be compensated for the time in their life that they were robbed from. I want both of you to respond on this, but we'll go to you first, Attorney Court. What are your thoughts first on exonerated individuals not automatically being in position to seek a remedy from the state? And how do we change that?
First of all, even if they paid me a check of $1 trillion,
not worth it.
I'm not taking it to go to prison.
Right.
And the idea that Pennsylvania is one of the few states that does not allow for automatic compensation. You need big time lawyers and law firms like here, because otherwise you won't get what you need. Here's the thing. Since 1989, $4.6 billion has been paid in compensation to people exonerated. $4.6 billion since 1989. Not one penny to those in Pennsylvania. And the time you do in Pennsylvania is the same time you do in any other state. So why does the guy or the woman in another state who's wrongfully convicted for 27 years not get a dime? Only because of Pennsylvania being what it is. So I know that there's legislation in Harrisburg to change that, but it can't come too soon. And for me, I don't know how it works in terms of ex post facto laws for those who didn't go to law school like us big time laws that you pass today that are retroactive. Well,
they got a grandfather clause. They have to make it retroactive.
They got to do something. So to the extent that they do pass a law in Pennsylvania to compensate people in the future, it must have some retroactive effect, because that idea, I got to tell you, and I'm being quite candid about this, they would have a reason to put me back in jail. Once I'm exonerated, that's all I'll say. There'd be a reason for me to go to jail, and that's all I'll say, because my attorney, Keir Bradford Gray, told me to tone it down a little bit. But the idea of 27 years and still be sane and still be rational and still be calm and composed, that's way above my pay grade.
Attorney Bradford Gray, again, same question. Why are we one of the few states that doesn't have the protocols and procedures set up automatically? Is it a recent law? Has it been a longstanding law? And how do we get it changed? I mean, saying that something is in Harrisburg is not the most inspiring thing to say for a law that we actually want to get passed right now.
At all. Well, I mean, look, there's been states that are far more progressive than we are, obviously, in many areas, like not just this, but many areas. Pennsylvania is that old conservative, even if it's run at the top of the helm by people who represent a Democratic Party, right? It's been this way. And I don't know what it's going to take, because sometimes what I was hearing, and I think I was a little disappointed when we were talking about compensation, that they were pitting taxpayers against people who are wrongfully convicted, basically making us feel like, oh, they're taking your money away. No, they didn't take our money away. What you did caused this to happen. And so we've got to point to the right boogeyman, because quite frankly, if you train your officers, if you hold them accountable, if there's more transparency, this wouldn't happen. And we need those three things baked into our model of policing, because quite frankly, I know for one, this system makes far too many assumptions, and the accumulation of those assumptions generally do not work out for us. And so for me, this is an issue of the Black community, the brown community, any community susceptible to the whims of the government, all under the guise of public safety. All the money gets shifted to public safety when the narrator starts talking about what we need to do. And I just think this is where we have got to own these narratives, do more research, and push against those false characteristics of what crime is and what it isn't. Because I want to see those people in the boardroom be treated just like the people on the street corner.
In fact, Dr. Peterson, if I could just quickly add to what Keir said. First of all, co-sign everything Keir said. I mean, that was right on point. And then toward the end, she talked about the Black people and the brown people. Well, let's deal with the elephant in the room. This whole notion of exoneration, we're really talking primarily about people of color, Black men in particular. So why is it that Black men find themselves in need of being exonerated? Because the system is blatantly racist. Across the country, last year in 2024, nearly 80%, 78%, nearly 80% of the exonerations were people of color. 60% were Black. So here we make up 13% of the population. If you're talking about Black men, you're probably talking about 6% of the population. How in the hell does 6% of the population constitute 60% of the exonerations? Because the system is corrupt at its core. From the time the cop arrests you on the street until the judge imposes a sentence and you sit in the state prison. Something's got to be done. And that's why I really have to commend you, Dr. Peterson, because you're telling people what they didn't know.
That's right.
You're bringing in panelists who are enlightening people, and hopefully people do what needs to be done. I always tell people that I don't go to court to get justice because there's very little there. I go to court to expose the injustice because it's a lot there. And you, Dr. Peterson, you're exposing that injustice.
I'm trying. I want to talk a little bit about rights and voting rights, particularly here. So. I just want to be clear for our listeners around what happens to voting rights for those who are convicted versus those who are exonerated versus those who are reentering, because by design, it's very confusing. You have a lot of folks who come out of the system and believe they don't have the right to vote. We'll go to you, Attorney Bradford Gray, because here's the thing. I'm trying to figure out how do we continue to build coalitions and build awareness and get people involved. And I think a lot of it, from what I'm learning over the course of Exonerated, is making sure that at least from my perspective, that we give a platform to the people who are directly impacted by it to talk about it. But I think there's just been confusion about voting rights. We need them also to vote. So can someone, Attorney Bradford, can you break that down for us, the voting rights in this issue?
Simple. Let's just make it plain. We just talk about the only time you can't vote. When you're serving a sentence for a felony conviction. Everything else is fair game.
Okay.
If you're sitting in jail on a misdemeanor, you can vote. If you're sitting in jail on a probation detainer, you can vote. If you're sitting in jail waiting to be transferred somewhere, that does not involve a felony conviction, you can vote. If your feet are touching the ground outside of that institution, you can vote.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what you were convicted of. If your boots are on the ground, you can vote. This is the most frustrating part because I have no idea why this has been such a hard thing and why people have convoluted the conversation so much so as to confuse people and discourage people from voting. Secondly, I just want to throw a shout out to Commissioner Omar Sabir because he is galvanizing legal people like myself, and I'm hoping we pull Mike Cord in. I know he's a part of everything, but the jails need to create a process to allow people in those institutions who can vote the access to vote. And no one wants to touch it because, it's those people. We're talking about voter access. This is a civil right that's being denied just because the people running the facility don't feel like putting together a process.
Unbelievable. I want to stay on the rights conversation for a little while here. Attorney Cord, talk about the Miranda rights and the kind of arresting process. I know that there is disparate impact at every step of the criminal justice process, but I've heard calls for reforming the Miranda rights protocols. I'm not sure where either of you are on that, but I'd love for you to speak to that, Attorney Cord.
Just so people know, we're talking about Miranda versus Arizona, 1968 U.S. Supreme Court case. And the facts of that case are horrible. A Latino guy who was charged with a rape, who did not speak English, spoke only Spanish, but couldn't read Spanish. And this is where the traitors come in. They got a Latino Arizona police officer to basically trick Miranda and get him to say that, I know the woman is attractive, and I've been to her house before. He never said I committed the sexual assault. He just said, I know the woman, I've been to her house, and she's attractive. And they used that in order to convict them. Of course, the case went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said you have the right to remain silent, all that kind of stuff in regard to your decision not to speak. But here's the thing. I'm going to tell you what the big picture is and what the smaller picture is. And I know Kira's had the same kind of experience when we talk about Miranda versus Arizona. I really wish my clients would do what I never do, which is sit down and shut up. I mean, because every time I'm in court, my client is nudging me at the defense table. Oh, the cop is lying. The cop is lying. I'm like, I'm not going to say what I say to my client, but it goes something like this. Why the F did you say anything anyway? Like, why did you're telling me that the cop twitched your words around. Why'd you give him words to twist? You thought that those slick games that you play on the street, you can just do some crazy stuff. The cop's going to act like Columbo. For the young people who don't know Columbo, that's the cop who always act like he was confused. And he just had you keep talking until you paint yourself in the corner. But getting to your point specifically, Dr. Peterson, the Miranda versus Arizona case clearly says you have the right to remain silent. And in Philadelphia, they give you a form. So when I get arrested, there are 7 questions on that form. They boil that Miranda decision down to 7 questions. But here's the second one, that even if I didn't go to law school, even if I didn't graduate from college, even if I got a GED or less, the second one says, do you understand that anything you say can and will be used against you? So I'm saying to the cop, officer, you're saying right now that whatever I tell you, you're going to use it against me. He says, yes. Why the hell would I say anything? Because I hear that, but I'm speaking in a kind of academic way. The pressure is on you in that interrogation room. There's yelling, there's screaming, there's threatening. And so you feel like, man, I need to say something. So long story short, my answer is twofold to you. One, please, everybody who can hear my voice, tell your family and friends, especially young Black men, sit down and shut up. That's the first thing. That way they can't twist your words around. Other thing is that the Supreme Court and federal courts have kind of watered down the effectiveness of that. You would think that if the law says that you have the right to remain silent, anything you say can and will be used against you. In some cases I've seen, they use your silence against you. And I'm like, for me, that's outrageous. So you just said I shot and killed my wife and children. I could be traumatized by that allegation. I'm not saying anything. And then when they get to court, they'll say, well, the officer said to Michael Cord that he was accused of shooting and killing his wife and children. By the way, all the listeners that have no wife and no children. This is all hypothetical. But I'm saying that if I did, then I'm traumatized by it, whether I did it or not. My point is the fact that the courts have, in a number of decisions, U.S. Supreme Court, have watered down the impact and the requirements of Miranda versus Arizona and every other important, quote unquote, civil rights, civil liberty defendants' rights cases. It's a frightening concept. And the only way it's going to change is for us to have forums like what you're having, Dr. Peterson. So now people are educated. People now understand where that Miranda versus Arizona case came from. They understand about the lack of compensation and maybe pressure politicians to pass legislation in Harrisburg. So again, I know I thank you a number of times, but I'm going to keep doing it, Dr. Peterson. You're doing a public service.
No, I appreciate it. Attorney Bradford, I want you to answer that too. But so I think part of what has happened, and maybe this is why Miranda needs to be rewritten, is because the whole, and thank you for giving us the case. Attorney Court, thank you for giving us the history of the case. We need to understand that. But the thing that's challenging for me is that the right to remain silent has become this hackneyed, overused term. We see it in all these police procedurals. We see it in all these blah, blah, blah. And so I don't think that people appreciate it. You know how sometimes you just hear something over and over again? It sounds like something else. So like, what else can we say, or how else can we impress upon people that you need to be quiet, period, if you're arrested? Attorney Gray, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on this issue.
I think there needs to be a campaign, like Mike Core says, shut the F up. And I mean that in all sincerity, because there's no reason for you to talk to police officers as they are looking to prosecute you for this. Now, once you get an attorney and you can talk with your attorney, and we decide together we need to go get in front of this for whatever reason, that's a decision we make together based on everything. But don't be your own lawyer out in the streets. That's never going to work out for you. And one of the things you said, Dr. Peterson, is so correct. When my clients get arrested, they get in a room, and here's how I ask the officer, how you doing? You all right? You comfortable? You want anything? You need anything to drink? You need anybody to call? I'm just going to ask you a few questions, right? But let me just go through a few formalities. You know you have the right to remain silent. You know you can do that. But sign right here so we can get this over with. You know, it's become very coy in the way you really bypass some very fundamental rights right there, like the right to incriminate your own self in a crime. And they do it in a way that makes it seem like those things don't even matter.
Right.
Like it is just TV stuff. And so I think people get in their head, okay, let me just go ahead and talk to this guy so I can get out of here.
Yes.
Right? That's generally the mindset. The quicker I just give them what they want to say, the quicker I get out of here. And I am tired of people wanting to rush through this criminal justice process and then regret it later. That's one thing that I see time and time again. Oh, I pled because I didn't feel like it. Oh, I needed to get out, so I pled. But now I'm stuck with this felony and I can't do this, that, and the other. I'm a leper in society. I want to tell you that, look, this is about your life-altering decisions are made in that criminal justice system. It's not for the faint at heart, but quite frankly, it is worth the wait. It is worth you waiting for your attorney that can represent you. And if you have a public defender, newsflash, they're attorneys. All right. Many people say, I don't have an attorney, I have a public defender. They are lawyers. They went to they had the same law degree and passed the bar the same way that we all did. So if you have a public defender, stick with that, at least just to understand what's going on.
And better than some private attorneys. I've worked with public defenders as co-counsel and big name private attorneys. Believe me, I'd take that public defender anytime. And in fact, some of those lawyers couldn't get jobs in the public defender's office. But go ahead, Keith.
I will say why. Remember, and look, there's all variations of everybody, right? But lawyers who really want to do the good job in the public defender's office learn how to do that through years and years of practice, through trial after trial. Their expertise is so sharp and crisp. And so when people say, I don't want a public defender, I get that you're nervous. But I will say, I will agree with Mike. They know things like the back of their hand, whereas a private lawyer may have tried 5 cases in a year. A public defender tried 5 in a day.
True.
So experience. So now we are getting a little bit short on time. We have got about 5 minutes left. Although I could talk to you all day, but we will be talking again tomorrow. I'm inspired by this conversation around Miranda rights, and I want to make sure that we take another minute or so. We'll go to you first, Attorney Court. If can you give us any more information about our rights when it comes to the criminal justice system that from your perspective is like matter of fact, but like we in the public may not be aware of it? Like the Miranda rights is one piece. Are there other examples like that? Things that people need to know, especially if it's like their first encounter with the criminal justice system, or it's their parents or their child's first encounter with the criminal justice system? Are there things like that we just need to know? I know we can't give a full classroom right here on these things, but in terms of our rights, what are some of the other things we need to know with that first brush with the criminal justice system?
Once again, you make it plain. I got a 2-hour answer. I'm going to cut to 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes. Cars and phones. Cars and phones. There was a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago which basically said this: cops cannot search your motor vehicle. So if they think that you have drugs, guns, or whatever in it, either they have to have exigent circumstances or a warrant. They can't just say, hey, I think I smell marijuana. You got to pop the trunk. No. So first thing, in regard to cars, never consent to a search of your motor vehicle. That's clearly important because they can either plant something in there or you could have something in there. Either way, don't consent. You can't physically stop them from searching it, but at least you can come to your lawyer and say, hey, I never gave him consent. Now, Kira and I know we file suppression motions. The first thing is, don't give consent for the police to search your car if they have what we lawyers call exigent circumstances. It's emergency. They see somebody shoot up a house and jump into a car. They can track down that car. But if it's not exigent and they don't have a warrant, don't give consent. That's the first thing. Second thing, there's a case called Commonwealth versus Davis from about 4 years ago. It all comes down to this: never put your information, your passcode on your phone by fingerprint or facial recognition. No fingerprint, no facial recognition. Here's why. You can be forced to disclose the contents of your phone if it's facial recognition or fingerprint, but not if it's a password memorized in your head. I'm going to give you the 30-second version. It's a horrible case.
I did not know this, Attorney Court. Go ahead.
Tell people to Google the Davis case from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court about 3 years ago. It's a horrible case dealing with child molestation and all that kind of stuff. Some pervert got caught, but I'll give the pervert credit. White guy out in one of the Boondocks counties. He had a 64-character encrypted password. 64-character encrypted password. So when the authorities came to get his phone, he refused to tell them the 64-character password. And the judge held him in contempt. It then went up to the Pennsylvania Superior Court. They said, sir, you're going to stay in jail until you give your password. Went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, no. If the password is in the person's head, there is no more violation of a person beyond going into their head. So if the information is in their head, authorities, you can't get it. But if you got reason to believe it's written down somewhere in his house, you can get it. If you believe it's his thumbprint, you can get it. If you believe it's facial recognition, you can get it. The Davis case says, no, if it's in your head, they can't get it. So 1, no consent on a car. 2, don't put your password in your fingerprint, in your face, keep it in your head.
Stunning. We're going to go to you, Attorney Bradford. This is our last question for the series. You both know that Exonerated has discussed a lack of resources for individuals after prison release in Pennsylvania. What are some of the practical and policy changes that are needed to better support exonerees, support the reentry community into society, especially given employment and social adjustment issues for some of your past clients or maybe future clients? We'll go to you first, Attorney Bradford Gray.
Well, just briefly, one of the things that I have seen is that because people are in so long, they don't accumulate any credit. So when it comes to getting an apartment or a home, that is a very cumbersome task because they just don't have a history. We also had looked at them getting loans for transport, a car or whatever, if they were lucky enough to find a job that gave them the financial ability to buy that. Banks and loan companies were turning them down. So we connected with certain banks, TD Bank is one of them, to have a special consideration for people who have been away in any institution for a very long time and have to build their credit. So they are doing special things with that. And we did this uniquely as a reentry program with TD Bank. So I do commend them for doing that. I don't know any other bank that is doing that, but we need to be, that's a big thing. Secondly, we need to be helping people get documents and paperwork that will allow them to move forward, because many people go to jail, especially exonerated, for decades. They don't have a social security card. They don't have certain things. So they come out and they really can't maneuver. So we need to have something with these administrative offices that allows them to get information based on whatever they've got on their prison records. Get your rightful IDs, because that will never allow you to integrate wherever you need to go. You can't get benefits without IDs. You can't get medical insurance without IDs. And these are real life things that people don't even think about. As they're thinking about people coming out, they're like, oh my God, what are they going to do for work? Well, how are they going to even get the basics?
Right.
Benefits. So that's what I would say. And of course, like I said, we need a compensation scale for anyone who has been exonerated. There needs to be a compensation scale like there is in California, Chicago, and all these other places. They do at least a certain amount for you. I think Texas, there's $80,000 per year.
Texas?
Texas. And this ain't Texas, right? Texas. $80,000 per year for each year you have served where you were wrongfully convicted. So these are just things that people have done to make sure that we make up somewhat for the wrongs that we did. And lastly, I'm going to shut up. I want to say I thoroughly enjoy being in this conversation with both you and Michael Cord, two of my favorite people. Michael Cord always gives me a legal lesson, a CLE. I feel like I can go apply for some credits right now. And James, you always give me a very scholarly understanding and history of anything we talk about, because you always go to the origins and the roots. So just thank you both for being who you are. You just inspire me and help me keep going.
Thank you, Keir. Attorney Cord, you got about 30 seconds here. Practical policy change for the exonerated.
I'll take 20 seconds and I'll say this. The system needs to change, but while it's as flawed as it is, anybody who finds themselves released as an exonerate or anything, there's a great city service called the City's Office of Reentry Partnerships. They do everything, jobs and homes and credit and all that. So please, folks, the system is bad. Policy needs to change, but while this is messed up as it is, call 215-683-3370, 215-683-3370. If you have a loved one who just got out and wants to get herself together, the city's Office of Reentry Partnerships, 215-683-3370.
Attorney Keir Bradford Gray, the head of civil rights litigation at Marrone Law Firm. Attorney Michael Cord, criminal defense attorney and WRD radio host. Thank you both. I love you both. I'm looking forward to our conversation tomorrow, but thank you for riding out with us here for the series finale on Exonerated. We appreciate you both.
By the way, I took 29 seconds, and my last comment was 29 seconds. I want you to know that.
Go ahead, Keir. What were we going to say?
Thank you, James. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Young Mighty Jordans. I know the team is over there telling you we got to go. So.
Yes. Thank you both. I appreciate you. You're listening to the series finale of Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions, live on Evening WURDs on WURD, 900 AM, 96.1 FM, Philadelphia, WordRadio.com, and the Word Radio app.
You've been listening to Exonerated, the Cost of Wrongful Convictions, a Word Radio podcast produced in partnership with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. To learn more about the Pennsylvania Innocence Project and their work to free the wrongfully convicted and support their reentry, visit painnocence.org. Exonerated is brought to you by Marrone Law Firm, standing by your side when it matters most. For more programming like this, tune into Word Radio at 900 AM or 96.1 FM or online at wordradio.com. And don't forget to follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Word Radio, progressive Black Talk Media.